Hello, my random viewers, and welcome to Randomly Offensive. Today, we will be delving into the conflict between Yoshimitsu and Bryan Fury. And in order to do that, we must delve into Yoshimitsu's origins. We will not be delving deep into the events with Yoshimitsu in the first and second Tekken games, because I've already done that in the Heihachi storyline and in the King the First storyline. If you have not seen that, it is linked right up at the tippy top, Heihachi first, King second, and you can click on either one you may not seen. Now, with that being said, Yoshimitsu is a well-trained, well-respected ninja and is the head of the Manji clan. The Manji clan is a Robin Hood-like group who robs from the rich and gives to the poor, and Yoshimitsu tries to do whatever he can to protect the little guy. He does everything he can not to be corrupted by his own power and his own wealth, and always tries to allow those who are incapable of providing for themselves to make sure that they are provided for. He tries to protect those who cannot protect themselves. He tries to give those who have no power amongst the powerful. And so with that being said, let's delve into the origins of Yoshimitsu. Now, as the head of the Manji clan, Yoshimitsu is one of the most fiercest ninjas there are, and his job, his self-proclaimed job, is to protect the poor and give the poor income. Now, with the Tekken 1 events, Yoshimitsu decides that he will become a part of it and to try to win the cash prize. However, when he joins the first Iron Fist tournament, he is not victorious, and after the tournament, he decides that he's going to rob Heihachi. He's going to rob the Mishima Zaibatsu and get that $1 million in order to provide for the poor. Now, when he attempts this, he is beaten down by the Tekken Force, while also taking on Ganru, who is a corrupt sumo who's abandoned the sumo code and is helping out the Tekken Force. Now, the Tekken Force dang near kills Yoshimitsu using explosives and guns, and though Yoshimitsu manages to take out the majority of the Tekken Force, he is left for dead in the forest. Now, Dr. Boscanovich is in the area and finds Yoshimitsu's body dumped and left for dead, and so he saves the life of Yoshimitsu. Yoshimitsu takes it upon himself to repay the debt of Dr. Boscanovich saving his life. And so, in the Tekken 2 events, he finds out that Dr. Boscanovich has been taken prisoner by Kazuha, who is now the head of the Mishima Zaibatsu, and Dr. Boscanovich is being held against his will in order to create and do scientific studies and create formulas for Kazuha to benefit the Mishima Zaibatsu, improving Kazuha's chances of world domination. And so Yoshimitsu joins the second King of the Iron Fist tournament to save Dr. Boscanovich. Now again, he fails at being victorious in the second Iron Fist tournament, but with Heihachi winning and taking over the Mishima Zaibatsu once again, he apologizes to Dr. Boscanovich and then he rewards him greatly and offers him a position at the Mishima Zaibatsu as the head scientist, and Dr. Boscanovich accepts, with Yoshimitsu being employed by the Mishima Zaibatsu as well, so that Yoshimitsu can make sure that Dr. Boscanovich is never put in that slavery-style position again. And so, as the years pass, Yoshimitsu starts realizing that Dr. Boscanovich is slowly dying, and as a result of this, for all of the adaptations and all the improvements that Dr. Boscanovich has done to Yoshimitsu, and Yoshimitsu having his life saved by Dr. Boscanovich, he decides that he's going to go to the third Iron Fist tournament. Now, the third Iron Fist tournament does not have Yoshimitsu as a competitor, but instead as a bodyguard of Heihachi, which Heihachi offered to Yoshimitsu. He accepted with the intentions of the ogre showing up, because he can use the blood of the ogre to help Dr. Bosconovich create a formula to allow Bosconovich to live longer. And so Yoshimitsu stands by the side of Heihachi. He sees Bryan Fury, and he knows, because he's been by the side of Bosconovich, that Dr. Abel is the one that bought the corpse of Bryan Fury and reanimated him with the intentions of sending him to kill Yoshimitsu, leaving Dr. Bosconovich without protection that would allow Dr. Abel to steal all the research and all the work from Dr. Bosconovich. So Yoshimitsu points a finger at Bryan and sends him to the forest. Now we get to the point where we left off with the last video. Yoshimitsu has just slashed the stomach of Bryan, and they stand across from each other, staring each other down, and they engage in battle. One of the first fights of many. A amazing, fantastic rivalry between Bryan Fury and Yoshimitsu, and these two will be rivals for the next 30 years. And now we are going to get into the fight of Yoshimitsu, beginning the story of Yoshimitsu, beginning the story of Bryan, and continuing the story of Bryan Fury, while also focusing on the great ninja, the great warrior Yoshimitsu. We will be delving into Lee's interactions with both of these men, while also delving into, finally, the storyline of Lei Wulong. And so, with all of this being said, with all the recap, with all the explanation out of the way, it is time to delve into the epic story of Bryan and Yoshimitsu. The first move is made by Yoshimitsu as this ninja thrusts the blade into the chest of Bryan Fury. However, not a single reaction comes from Bryan. He doesn't even flinch as the blade is thrusted into his chest, and immediately he grabs the handle of the blade that is now in his chest with his left hand, and then using his right hand and arm, he is repeatedly punching and elbowing Yoshimitsu into the face. Yoshimitsu then is forced to let go of the blade, and with that being done, Bryan delivers a Spartan chamber kick to the chest of Yoshimitsu, sending him flying back. The ninja manages to recover quickly and jump back on his feet in just enough time to see Bryan pulling the blade out of his chest and then thrusting the blade towards Yoshimitsu with a tremendous speed. However, the ninja Yoshimitsu manages to dodge it and catch it as it flies past him, and he then jumps in the air, twirling in many, many circles with the blade going downwards. Bryan blocks it with his forearm, with the blade going in deep, and he then delivers a massive uppercut to Yoshimitsu's gut, bending Yoshimitsu's body around the arm of Bryan. Bryan then, without letting Yoshimitsu touch the ground, picks him up with the punch and twirls him over his shoulder and slams him into the ground behind them, and Yoshimitsu goes bouncing off. Bryan pulls the blade out of his forearm and stabs Yoshimitsu in the leg, and the blade goes through Yoshimitsu's leg and into the ground, pinning the ninja down and quite literally nailing him to the ground. Before Yoshimitsu has a chance to get up and grab his blade out of his leg, he starts getting an onslaught from Bryan as Bryan gets on top of him and just delivering skull-breaking punches, one after another, after another, after another, after another, after another, and Bryan is just laughing with every punch. As Bryan is just delivering this massive, massive attack, he is laughing sinisterly and crazily, and Yoshimitsu doesn't know how to handle this zombie, this undead beast, and so Yoshimitsu uses a smoke bomb to try to blind Bryan. But Bryan doesn't stop punching. Bryan is punching the ground, punching the chest of Yoshimitsu, punching the face, whatever. He is not even aiming, he doesn't care, he just wants to kill this ninja. And so Yoshimitsu then uses an ancient technique where he turns into smoke and manages to warp away from Bryan. And as he warps away from Bryan, the blade is left in the ground with Bryan kneeling onto the ground that used to be Yoshimitsu. And now Yoshimitsu stands behind this man, and once again, they lock eyes. And then out of nowhere, Yoshimitsu disappears and camouflages into the land. Now Bryan does not know where Yoshimitsu is, and then he sees the blade picked up out of the ground and disappearing at the same time. And so Bryan puts his hands up and starts watching the grass. And now he's seeing the footsteps of Yoshimitsu being imprinted upon the grass. And so he delivers a punch in the direction, but hits nothing, meaning Yoshimitsu is able to dodge or run away. And now Yoshimitsu is slashing into the body of Bryan. However, Bryan does not feel pain. Bryan Fury doesn't realize he's being slashed and stabbed. Yoshimitsu doesn't realize that this man can't die. So the two of them are going up against each other, not knowing each other's limits nor strengths. And so as Bryan is consistently dropping blood and bleeding, and just holes are just appearing in his body from nowhere, Yoshimitsu is trying to get this guy to bleed out and eventually die, but it's not happening. And so Bryan finally sees a footprint imprint right in front of him and delivers a punch that he feels connecting, and he sees blood come out of thin air, presumably out of the mouth of Yoshimitsu, and hit his forearm. And so following the trajectory of the blood, he reaches towards Yoshimitsu's skull and is successful, grabs Yoshimitsu's skull and then starts elbowing the palm of his hand, knowing that is going to connect with the face that is in front of his hand. As he does this, blood marks are just appearing and showing up on Bryan's elbow, and Yoshimitsu finally comes out of his camouflage state, his invisible state, and his face is disfigured, and the armor skull that he once had is starting to shatter around his face as he is being destroyed by Bryan Fury. However, that is when something unknown to Bryan happens. Bryan looks down at his hands as he sees that his skin, his very flesh, is melting off his bones. His flesh is disintegrating, and Bryan is panicked by this sight and confused as his skin melts off his bones, and now he has not a single piece of skin left, and his muscles start to mirror what his skin had just done, melting off of his very bones. And Bryan is now no lips, no eyelids. His eyeballs are sticking out, bulging out of his skull. As he looks to Yoshimitsu to ask him what the hell he did to him, he cannot say a thing because he has no lips to speak with, and his tongue is melting and dissolving away. And finally, all that's left of Bryan is a skeleton, his eyeballs, and his inner organs, and he collapses to the ground as his inner organs, his heart, his kidney, his bladder, all of it is just melting and dissolving away, and his eyeballs finally dissolve into his skull, with his brain being the last thing to melt away. And Yoshimitsu sheathes his sword as he stands up and walks away, with this being his victory, assuming Bryan Fury is dead. Because you see, when he was camouflaged, when he was invisible, he had put poison on his blade. Enough poison and enough slashes and stabs to Bryan to cause his entire body to disintegrate. However, 6 hours pass of Bryan's skeleton lying on the ground. He is slowly regenerating, and the degeneration caused no pain within Bryan, but the regeneration is causing tremendous pain within Bryan, and as he regenerates, Bryan is screaming in pain as his kidneys come back, his eyeballs come back, his brain comes back, his muscle comes back, and finally his skin. And Bryan sits up terrified at what he just experienced, terrified at what he just went through, and now he realizes that in the tournament, Yoshimitsu is equal to every other roster, but outside of the tournament, Yoshimitsu is one of the deadliest foes you could go up against because there are no rules in the real world, and Yoshimitsu is a far greater monster than Bryan, and this infuriates Bryan, and he promises himself that he will become more of a devil, more of a monster, more of a beast than Yoshimitsu ever will, and he is going to put Yoshimitsu through the same traumatic torture that he had just went through, cursing that Yoshimitsu will feel this very same pain and fear that he caused Bryan to feel. And now Bryan is pissed with a whole new lust of bloodshed, because not only does he want vengeance on Yoshimitsu, but he wants to prove that he is more terrifying than Yoshimitsu, that he can do worse than Yoshimitsu. And now Bryan becomes one of the most psychopathic serial killers that we have ever seen. And as all of this horrifying events take place, Lee is lying next to a tree, witnessing the whole thing, thinking to himself how he will be able to use Bryan and Yoshimitsu in his future schemes. And now we get to move on to the Tekken 4 events. Bryan returns to his home, the laboratory. However, when he was about to explain to Dr. Abel what just happened, he begins to feel his body dying. And Bryan doesn't understand how his body works. He doesn't know. How is it that he could regenerate from his entire flesh, his entire body rotting away, but yet he can't survive for a certain amount of time without the formula? He doesn't know how his body works. He needs Dr. Abel to look at him more. And so as he walks in to the laboratory to get more formula and then try to figure out how his body actually operates, Dr. Abel is dead. Had died of old age in his sleep while Bryan was gone. And so now Bryan is furious as he beats the crap out of this dead body, out of this corpse, repeatedly punching this body, showing the demonic, evil sense that Bryan has, and his anger is getting the best of him as he beats the corpse of a man that was the closest thing he had to a friend, to the point that you could not recognize who he was. And so Bryan takes the final formula that Dr. Abel made and injects it in himself. He looks into the sky as he realizes that he will die or not die. He doesn't know how his body works, but if he's going to die, he's going to do it with a bang. And so he goes into the streets, and he is going to prove that he is the man to fear, that the ogre, that Yoshimitsu, Azazel, Heihachi, Kazuha, Jin, none of them are nowhere near the monster that he is, and he's gonna make a name for himself. And so he walks through the dark alleys, hunting those that don't deserve it, breaking the necks, slashing men, women, and children with any weapon he can get his hands on, as he becomes one of the most notorious killers the world has ever seen. Lei Wulong, a police officer, is called to a crime scene. Lei Wulong pulls up in his police car and looks at a cop who is already on the site and asks, "Which apartment room?" And the cop looks at him. "No, not a room. Just go in there and see for yourself," he says. And so Lei Wulong walks into the apartment building, and the sight he sees is disgusting, disturbing, and terrifying, and it strikes fear into Lei's heart, for it is not one room. It was the entire apartment building with children, daughters, sons, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, wives, husbands, friends, just innocent people now are creating an ocean of blood within the entire apartment building, so profusely that blood runs down the staircase like a waterfall. And as Lei walks through the apartment building, there are bodies hanging from ceiling fans, bodies shoved in ovens, heads cut off and thrown onto the dining tables, hands chopped off and thrown into cabinets. And there are bodies that are just torn apart, not with a knife or a weapon, but by bare hands. And as Lei walks through this blood-drenched apartment building with blood on the walls and the doors, he sees Bryan's calling card and stares at it, not understanding how someone so evil could be around. And so he picks up his phone and calls the one man he doesn't want help from, which is Li Xiaolong. "I was wondering how long it would take you to call me," Li says as he answers the phone to Lei. Lei stays quiet for a moment and then responds, "I need your help stopping him." And Li smiles into the phone. "I am the only man that can talk to him, so you made the right choice. I will contact Bryan Fury." And Lei tells him, no, not without my supervision. I want this bastard. And Li hangs up the phone and then tracks down Bryan Fury. And he sees Bryan in an alley when he finally tracks him down, beating the crap out of an innocent man. Bryan looks up and sees Li, so he grabs a man's skull and smashes it against the side of a building with enough force to where the skull explodes, and Bryan's hand goes through the skull and into the building. With brains on his fingertips, he wipes them off to his jeans. "So, you must need to contact me when you needed to," he says to Li, and Li looks back at Bryan, saying, "I told you I'd keep you alive, and that is exactly what I'm doing now," he says as he stares down to Bryan. And Bryan's like, "I don't even know if I need saving. My entire body disintegrated and I came back. I don't even know if the formula is even needed," he says. And Li looks at him with a smile. "Your eyes are green," he says, catching Bryan off guard. "Your eyes were not green the last time we met. I wonder why your eyes are now green instead of brown," he says as he looks into Bryan's eyes. Bryan doesn't know where this is going and continues to listen. "I have been in contact with Yoshimitsu and Dr. Biskanovich." This angers Bryan. So you betrayed me. No, I have not betrayed you. I got information about you. What kind of studies have you possibly done on me? He says as he's walking angrily towards Lee. However, Lee shows no fear and continues staring into the eyes of Bryan. The only studies that you can do when you're talking to the world's best scientist, my father, the ones that work under my father, Yoshimitsu, Dr. Boskanovich, and of course, myself, for I have conducted my own studies, and I have found out what happened when you are nothing but a skeleton lying in the forest woods. Bryan is now toe-to-toe with Lee. However, Lee still shows no fear as he slowly blinks, looking into the eyes of Bryan, not breaking eye contact one bit. Lee then continues. You died that day, Bryan. Yoshimitsu killed you, and your regeneration? That had nothing to do with your body. That had nothing to do with you. You are no god. You died by the hands of Mr. Yoshimitsu, and Bryan then has had enough and grabs Lee by the throat, picking Lee up off the ground. However, Lee is still showing no fear, just staring into the eyes of Bryan. My father killed the ogre, he says. Now he's starting to gasp for air. However, the ogre needed a soul to go to, and he picked yours, he says. And so Bryan drops Lee, and Lee gasping for air, but getting up slowly, and continues staring down at Bryan. What do you mean? What are you telling me? Bryan says. Lee looks up and says, I'm telling you, your eyes weren't always green. I am telling you that the ogre needed a soul. The ogre needed a body, and so he chose yours and rebuilt your body. You are now the ogre and the fury. So I'm the world's strongest monster, is that what you're saying? Lee nods. Yes, that is what I'm saying. But I'm also saying that you are being hunted by the entire Tekken force, because, well, Heihachi wants the ogre dead, along with every single threat that this Earth has, and you are now one of them, my man. However, if I make the call, if I tell the Tekken force where you are, you know that they're going to strike you, meaning I get to hold up my end of the bargain, keeping you alive. How is making an entire army charging at me keeping your end of the bargain? Says Bryan Fury, very, very furious. Lee just keeps staring at this man with no fear and continues, well, if you're aware of them coming, you can defend yourself. Plus, you cannot die. And while you're fighting, while the Tekken force is focused on you, that'll give me time to talk more to Dr. Boskanovich and Yoshimitsu. Maybe, just maybe, I can make a deal with them. Maybe Dr. Boskanovich can turn you into his plaything. By making you a plaything of his, he will keep you alive so that he has a guinea pig to test on. Sounds like a pretty good plan, doesn't it? I'm really good at chess, and I am proud of myself, he says, smiling, finally breaking eye contact with Bryan, and Bryan smiles at this. So, you are keeping your end of the deal, he says, and Lee now walking away. Yes, I have kept my end of the deal, and the Tekken force will be here any second because they're gunning for you, and I told them where you are, so get ready, my man, he says as he finally walks away and out of sight of Bryan. Bryan gets ready for the battle of a lifetime. He gets to prove to himself in front of the entire world that not even the greatest army on the planet stands a chance against him, and so he prepares himself for war. One man versus hundreds. And that is all I have to say for today. If you guys enjoyed, please do consider hitting the like and subscribe button. And if you're new here, definitely consider subscribing if you enjoyed what you listened to. And if you made it this far, thank you so much. I will be continuing the story of Bryan, along with the story of Lai, Lee, and Yoshimitsu, because Bryan's story is carried heavily by those characters. So with that being said, do not get hit by a meteor. Take care of yourselves, and bye.